and welcome to another Games Masters chat. Today we will be talking about game etiquette. We have Josiah joining us today, and of course we've got
Hello.
Katie and Fillets, and I'm Sarah. We are the GMs of Wayfarer's League. There was a question that actually came up in our server, in our Discord server, from our patrons, specifically about tabletop etiquette. Katie, do you know what specifically that the question was?
It was more general. It was more about like what are some top tips that we can give brand new players or new groups, like, because one thing Wayfarers does is kind of join together randoms, because a lot of times when in real life you gather a group of friends one or two times, like you might have brand new people that you've not met, but how do you present table etiquette in those circumstances? Like what is the kind of done thing? But obviously we're just learning because we've all gone online lately. So this is brand new for us as GMs and for players too. So I think the question was mostly like, for new players, what are some things to look out for when you're just starting out role playing with a new group?
I have an opening remark for that. That I think in a lot of regards, D&D interests and attracts people that may be more socially awkward in other arenas because it's more structured. And so maybe when you're pulling together a bunch of people that don't know each other, a good place to start is to lean in on that kind of structured, ordered side of things. And then you can begin to relax things as you get to know each other. There's this old saying that familiarity breeds contempt. And the idea with concepts like politeness, tradition, and the rules of etiquette is they're basically formalized traditions in order to make sure that you're not hurting other people's feelings. So in that regard, you can think of things like an initiative order and like the rules of the game as a formalized contract for this is how people are going to behave, this is how we're going to conduct ourselves, as a codified, this is how the the scenario is going to go. And so in that regard, I almost would consider starting it as a spectrum, starting with war games on one side and going to the more loose, informal, narrative-driven role play on the other side, because quite frankly, that does require more familiarity and more comfort and trust around the table. And I like that narrative-driven style of storytelling, but you need to know the people that around the table in order to get there. So as an opening remark, I would say start with a dungeon crawl with an initiative order, because then everyone's got their turn and you know what to expect from people.
That's definitely a good piece of advice, for sure. Yeah, I think so, like, some of it is like when you're starting to learn, like, know each other, you start to know what people's styles are going to be. And for a lot of the players that we have joining Wayfarers, they've maybe never played before at all. I'm currently running a game with players completely newbies, like for the first time. This is their first like kind of campaign, and they didn't know each other in advance either. But like, we are 5 weeks in, and it's changed completely. Like the dynamic of the group, everything's changed. And I think exactly what you said, Josiah, like we started with a lot of initiative stuff. There was opportunities for people to do kind of outside the spectrum kind of role play stuff, but obviously it just slowly builds, and now the characters have relationships with each other, which is, I think, really helpful.
I almost get the sense that the designers of D&D sort of know that, because it seems like some of the level 1 scenarios are almost more dungeon crawl. They almost seem more narrow in scope. I could be wrong about that, but it seems that way.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. 'Cause, like, I'm running Tyranny of Dragons at the moment, and literally the entire first sequence is just encounter after encounter after encounter, with very little reprieve in between, because it's meant to be just a very rushed, fast-paced first level scenario. So yeah, that definitely seems to be a theme, and I think that it does make sense to do that and have that structure. But I think, like, if you are homebrewing a game, or if you have a game that you're running that doesn't start that way, as a GM, kind of set your expectations to your players ahead of time, and let them know if there are things that you just don't tolerate at the table. I know a lot of GMs have kind of rules about like what they will and won't allow. For myself, I generally don't like having people drinking alcohol at my table, and purely because I don't want someone getting really, really drunk, because then it just spoils everything for everyone. But I know people have rules about like having phones out and things like that. And I personally am not a fan of the no phones rule, because some people do have, particularly when you have someone who maybe has something like ADHD and they can't focus on one thing for an extended period of time. And so they need something just to kind of switch off for a second so that they can get themselves back into it again. There's a lot of kind of rules that you might have at your table, and I just make sure that your players know that ahead of time. As far as being a player goes, if you're a new player in a game and you've never played anything before, one of the traps a lot of new players fall into is wanting to tell their story, and then they don't give anyone else in the party a chance to tell their stories. And you've got to remember, this is a communal game, and this is a collaborative game where everyone has their story that they're telling, and also you're telling the story together. So a fun kind of like little trick that I like to do if I'm playing a new game, especially with new people, is anytime I express something in character, I try to end it with a question to another player or to the group, so that every time something is said from my side, everyone else also has a chance to say something. So that's my little thing I like to do with new players in particular.
I love that. That's really good. I think one of the things I would say to players, especially when you're just starting out, or any players actually, is just as you said, Matthew, that like this is a story, everyone's story. It's the group story. And I think it came up in our last GM's chat just about sometimes we can go through like whole sessions where one character maybe doesn't get as involved, but they're still part of the story, and like enjoying the story is part of it. But also to the players who are maybe more comfortable role playing with NPCs and stuff like that, try not to, I would say, monopolize the GM's time, because the GM will go for it with NPCs. But if you monopolize their time, there's a whole table full of people that maybe just want to get on with the mission, and then don't necessarily want to spend a whole lot of time talking to this one guy who only has a little bit of information for them. So
I know I do that when I'm a GM. Is if a PC comes out and one of my NPCs and starts interacting with them, I go for it, and I will just keep going until they stop.
Yeah,
because that's my favorite thing to do. Is just
But then
you end up in that situation.
But that's also on the like the GM being aware, oh, I've got a lot of players over here that aren't interacting.
Yeah.
So we need to end this interaction so that
it's not
other people.
You don't necessarily need to end the interaction. Find a natural pause and say, what are you guys doing while this conversation is happening?
Good
and so
point.
then you can jump to other scenes, like if they're across the room or doing, one of the players be like, oh, I'm going to try to pickpocket this NPC while this conversation's happening. So it's like you get things like that.
Yeah,
that can be kind of fun.
One of the best online role players that you can watch for that sort of stuff is Travis Willingham in Critical Role, and it's something you might not even notice just on first glance. But Travis almost always, when a challenge is presented, will, rather than kind of go, I got this, or I'm going to do this, he'll usually kind of look at another party member who usually doesn't do this sort of thing and just go, hey, do you want to go and like speak to that guard over there and see if you can get any information out of him or something? He'll always hand it to someone else to make sure everyone gets their chance to kind of shine and do something really cool.
I think probably the bottom line of that in terms of etiquette is having some self-awareness in terms of how the table's running. And also there was, this is a vague memory of doing improv like however many years ago, but of this idea where you have, when you first starting doing improv, you're very self-centered, like looking at yourself, worried about what you are doing. And as you get more experience, you branch that out and suddenly you're realizing what other people are doing and you play off of them. And so then it's more of a scene rather than what just you are doing. And so that's part of being self-aware, but also being aware of others at the table.
100%. And if you ever watch like some of the top improv comedians out there, particularly games, like on game shows like Whose Line Is It Anyway, all of those guys, all they do is react to what other people do. They very rarely, someone always kind of has to start the scene, but for the rest of the scene, all they're doing is reacting to each other. They're not trying to take center stage. They're just kind of playing off each other. And that's what role play is as well. You're role playing and reacting to what the other people are doing.
And that includes the GM, and what the GM does for the story is that you're reacting to your players, right? As the story progresses. I feel like Josiah should talk about that, because it's like I feel like you have to react a lot to what our
characters do.
To those who are watching, Josiah has run games for myself and Fillets. I can't remember if Katie's been in any of his games.
No.
I think it was just a quick one shot on a Thanksgiving random.
Oh, that's right.
Like, everyone quick, build characters. Cool. Let's play for a couple hours.
Yeah, Josiah's been a GM for at least for myself for a few years. And our most recent party is a bit chaotic.
To say the least.
Oh man.
To say the very least. Anyway, so reacting.
I was just
reacting to players, I think.
Yeah. When Katie said that she was in one of my scenarios, I was just trying to mentally make up a number of scenarios that I've GM'd, and I just realized it may be over 1,000. I'm not sure what, but it's probably a lot. But I wanted to highlight something Flay said, I think twice now, that's really terrific. And it's about this ability to share time and just make sure that everyone's got, the ability to have some time with the GM or involved in the story. And that's why I brought up initiative order, is because it's kind of the most primitive, accessible way to make sure that everyone's got time.
It enforces that, yeah.
It's a way of enforcing that. That's why I call it primitive. But there's also the scientific approach to this, right? Which is, there's actually a book that I read that's the science of annoyance, right? So the scientific reason why some people find things annoying is two things. You need something that is mildly painful, and you don't know when it's going to stop. This is why children can be so irritating, is because it's not because you don't, it's because you don't know why they're doing the things that they're doing. And so you're not sure when it's going to stop, right? So the brilliance of the initiative order is that it's on this wheel, and that wheel means that there's an inevitability to the close. So whatever is going on right now, you know that your turn is coming up eventually, right? So one experience I had as a player, I was in a different scene, right? Like they said, a couple of players said, "Oh, we're going to the brothel," and I was like, "I need to go, investigate the shipyard. So I'll be back later." And so I was off scene. I didn't really mind that people were going to the brothel. I didn't mind that people were describing what they were doing at the brothel. But it just kept dragging on and on and on. And after a while, I'm just thinking, when is this going to stop, right? So for me, it wasn't the content, it was the duration. And so that's something I'd like to highlight about etiquette is, this may be a bit heavy-handed, but one thing I've seen one of my GMs do, I don't think I've done this myself, but is actually have a kitchen timer, and they would put a 5-minute timer on things, and hit the timer and put it down and say, okay, this is your turn, and put it down. And it's because, it's basically all boils down to how much time are we going to burn on this?
Yeah.
So it's something that you should think about, and be sensitive to people's feelings about how you're presenting it. But when you're being sensitive about people's feelings, it goes both ways. Both the person who's consuming the time and also the next person to come up that's waiting on that, right?
Yeah.
So
I think so jumping off of that, like how long people spend on different things. Some people don't mind the length of different scenes and whatnot. And like you could spend a lot of time introducing a new character, so other people are waiting for how that goes. I have some players that really enjoy role-playing meals. It's just a thing. They think it's hilarious. They have a good time, describing what they're eating, how they're eating it, and that can do a lot of character development too in those scenes, which is it's just one of those things. But I imagine I had someone join our table new. It did not fit the play style of the group. He was like I had no idea who this person was. This was a few years ago. Did not fit the table at all. And I think the entire party at the beginning of the scene, at the beginning of this entire scenario session, we're like, oh, it's noon, let's go get some food. And this other guy is like, well, I'm gonna go do the mission. Like he was ready to get going on investigating things, which is fair enough. But there was also ended arguments, and anyway.
right.
And that does happen. And I think because there's a difference between a player taking agency and a player giving agency to another person. It's such vast opposite things. And if you were constantly taking the agency, then you take it away from other people. The one thing I found is like your role play experience as a player will become so much more enjoyable when you get to the point that you can give agency to another player, sit back, watch, and just enjoy the scene that happens, that you don't have to actively be a part of. You can just sit back and watch it and enjoy it. And once you get to that stage, you're going to have a better time and you're going to gel better with the people you're playing with.
Yeah.
Can I add an aside to that?
Yeah.
If you have an established group and a person ever says, I'm not sure about this role-playing thing, I've never seen it before, would you mind if I come and just see one of your games? My advice would be to say yes, because anyone who's concerned about butting in is probably not going to have trouble with that whole taking agency thing that Felice was just talking about. So they might actually make a good addition to your gaming group. Just something that occurred to me. And that is a question that comes up very frequently, is people will say, I would just like to observe a game, but I don't want to make a character. That's a big ask for people.
One side,
so my advice would be to say, yeah.
I would say yes, but I would also, as a GM, check with my players first.
Yeah.
To see if they're okay with someone watching the game. Because some people, because I did offer that in Wayfarers in general, like months ago. And there are people that generally don't want just people watching. A lot of people don't mind. 90% of the time, people don't care. But there is that 10% where people get really uncomfortable with people just watching. But yes, I'm on the same side with you, Josiah. I'm like, yes, come and watch, and then we will absorb you into the hobby. Come play with us.
Yeah. And now we have this middle ground, where we exist online.
Yes.
Which is what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of broad strokes that we just talked about with etiquette at the table. Say you're a GM, you have set the ground rules, session 0. We've talked about what's allowed and what's not allowed. But then you come up to those moments where what's inevitably going to happen as a GM is that you're going to have to deal with player conflict. You can't necessarily always discuss every little bit. And so you get an email or a message saying, I'm really having a bad time with this. I know that's very general as well, because there's very specific things that happen. But if anybody has any stories about getting those kind of messages, how you dealt with those conflicts, would probably be beneficial to any GMs watching.
Yeah, I very recently had someone drop out of my Tyranny of Dragons game that he messaged me basically just, well, I'm just not having a good time with it, so I'm going to leave. And I was like, and my response, which would always be my first response, is just to ask, what is it that you're not having a good time with? Because if it's something I can fix, I will. In that case, he just wasn't prepared to continue with the game, and that was it. But I always kind of just say, like, if someone comes at me with that, first thing is just to ask for specifics to see if it is something that can be fixed, and just kind of opening that up to the rest of the group and just saying, because obviously these people usually contact you privately, but when that does happen, just kind of opening the message up to the group and just saying, if you guys have any issues, or if there is something you want to discuss, please just contact me and say, because if there is something I can do, I will do it to make your experience better. But that was very recently that one happened to me.
One of the big reasons why people will leave a game is because it's December or because it's January. So I'm just going to bring that up. So holidays are the ultimate game killers. So Merry Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. I think in that case, he did just say that my GM style just didn't match his player style, and that's fair enough. I've been GMing for 3 years, and I've had the number of complaints I've had I could count on one hand, so I'm not going to kick up a fuss about someone who just doesn't like my style.
Yeah, I think that that's one thing to note is, like, especially now in this world of, like, you're online together, you're meeting new people all the time. Sometimes you'll, like, play with people that you gel with instantly. Other times it's going to be quite difficult. And either you give it a bit of time, or you say, you know what, I'm going to find a different game. And that's absolutely fine. And nobody's judging you for that either. Like, if you, like, if one, like, because if you've played in the past, you're going to maybe be looking for a GM that, like, with style that you're familiar with. That's, maybe you'll have to find a few games before you find the kind of style that you like. That's absolutely fine. I do think that as far as etiquette goes, always go to your GM, like, privately or whatever, before you leave a game or whatever, and just tell them honestly, oh, this isn't doing it for me. It's not like, I just need to find this style or that style. For me personally, like, if I am not enjoying myself, I'll always start off with, well, maybe it's just the character I'm playing, and I'll give the group a chance, because it's not really to do with the group or the GM. It might be to do with me. So let me just figure something out that works for me. So yeah,
you contacted me about that
exactly.
in our villains campaign, and you've got a new character now who I think you seem to be enjoying quite a bit more.
Yeah, much better, absolutely. And it was that, like, it's just like finding the thing that it is and then changing it can sometimes make a whole world of difference. So yeah.
And any GMs out there, if a player does come to you with something like that, always be willing to say that's fine. Always be willing to share. In Tyranny of Dragons at this point, I've got 5 players in my campaign now, and 4 of them between 2 sessions that we had at level 3, 4 out of 5 changed their subclass. And this was admittedly right around the time when Tasha's Cauldron of Everything came out, and they were all reading all this new stuff. But, like, 4 of them came to me and just like, can I change this? And I was like, not a problem, go ahead.
Talking to your GM obviously is really, really important to talk to them first. But again, the main thing with any conflict in any group, in any relationship, is communication is the most important part of it. And so being open and honest about what the problem is, and not stewing and continually venting to friends or whoever is not in the game. They're like, oh man, this is really sucks, and feeling like you're stuck in that situation, because it could be an easy fix, whatever it is. If genuinely,
I actually know the player that did leave my game was talking to another person in the game about not having a good time, and never came to me. And it's like, the GM, how is the GM going to know that you're not having a good time and that you need something to change if you don't tell them?
Yeah. Like, if it's a one time and you're like, I'm just going to complain about this one thing, but the game itself is fine, that's one thing. But if you're continually having these issues, then they need to be brought to light to talk about with your GM and potentially with the group as well. Like, we had a whole thing with one of our games over the summer that we needed to talk about it as a group. And it was one of those things where we left the game and everyone wasn't happy. No one really started talking about it until like one message was sent, and another message, and suddenly we're having a web conversation, a video conversation about what the problem is, and everything got aired out. And now the group is better for it. Like,
Yep.
And so it's again, communication with any kind of issue.
Yeah, and there's also the whole psychology of group dynamics. And I don't know, for anyone who's studied psychology, there's the whole thing where you're like, there's the forming, storming, norming, performing. So the first thing is you form the group. Everyone's just like, yeah, this is going to be great. But suddenly there's the conflict. And this is the storming. This is where someone says something, they don't know how to communicate with each other yet. They figure out how to communicate with each other, and it becomes a normality. So it's a normal thing. And once you're in that normal communication, you're able to perform and actually perform in a way that is effective. So all groups have this dynamic, and some groups never make it past the storming stage. If you can make it past the storming stage, this is like what you said, Sarah, it actually becomes a better group for it to actually be like, this is a thing, this is a conflict. How do we work past that? And sometimes in the storming phase, maybe one person in the group has to leave because they're the conflict point, or maybe like you have to leave because you just can't get beyond it. But eventually that group is going to be better for it and be able to perform in a way that's incredibly effective with good communication. So it's absolutely, I mean, this is one of the things I like about D&D, because you get to see this work out within the characters, this whole psychology of that forming, storming, norming, and then performing.
Yes, it just reminded me, because with when you have player conflict, you also have character conflict. And it's so important as a player to keep those separate, because you could have severe like inner character conflict. And if you're taking that out of the game, that can become toxic and can ruin friendships.
This is something we had recently in the villains game, which I think you guys are probably aware of now. But two of the characters in the game, things were starting to get heated between them. They had very, very, they were taking actions that were very, very opposed to each other. And both of the players messaged me between games and were just like, just so you know, this stuff that this character has been doing, this is what I'm going to be doing in response to it. I just want to make sure it's all cool. And to both of them, I just said the same thing. I have no problem if characters have conflict between them, as long as it stays between the characters. And everyone was in agreement with that. So, and it's now led to what is going to be a very interesting storyline, because there's a lot of conflicts that's going on between those characters.
As a player,
it's escalated.
As a player, I absolutely adore PvP, but I know a lot of players don't.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely something as a GM talk about in session 0.
Yeah. And I think a good way to combat that is to make sure that all parties involved are being very clear when their character is a part of the conflict and not coming from the voice of the player, because that makes it really, really contentious. And everyone becomes reactionary at that point if you don't know that it's the character. If you think it's the player being that way, then all of a sudden you have bad feelings against the player. So a player needs to be very obvious when it's player versus player scenarios, that it's their character that are involved and not the player itself themselves.
And it can even help just to say, because like Katie, in one of the games we're in, one of the players recently came to the group and just said, I think I'm going to change character because no one seems to like my character, and you know, everyone just doesn't seem to like what I'm doing. And we were all like, no, our characters don't like your character. We all love your character. Yeah. Your character is a wonderful bundle of chaos and we love her. The characters don't necessarily like her that much at the moment, but we all do. So please don't change characters.
So I wonder if sometimes it might help to switch to talking in third person. in those cases?
Yeah, I mean, it's as long as you're kind of just being clear with each other where everything's coming from, I think it's okay. Because, like, we made it clear to her that we liked the character, the player, but it was just character conflict, and that's all really great. So as long as you kind of make that clear to the person, there shouldn't be any extra issue on that.
Yeah, so I've been quiet for a while because I've big feelings on this topic. It's a challenging topic because there's a lot to unpack. So one thing I would like to say is that as a GM, the sage advice is that you can't be pizza, you can't please everyone, and that it is actually a very desirable thing for you to go through in a sort of conveyor belt process a lot of players. And actually, I think that this is something I would encourage people to do. I have a gaming group that I put together that took like several years to put together, and it took a lot of going through people in order to find like people that were kind of fully compatible. And that's not something that happens overnight, right? And I guess that's kind of part of the building a friends group process. And it takes, part of that process is the fairly mature attitude that you aren't soulmates with everyone on the planet. You aren't equally compatible with everyone on the planet. And so you can't just pull random strangers off of the street and be like, we will agree with everything and, always get along, right? And so in that regards, if people don't like your vibe, that's not necessarily an attack on you. And I'm saying that to myself just as much as I'm saying it to everyone else, because I gotta be honest, I have a hard time feeling that internally, because there are a lot of times where I'm like, man, if I'm on top of my game, I should be loved by everyone all of the time without exceptions.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just not trying hard enough.
Yeah, there's this innate like desire to be a people pleaser, like in me. So for you to say that, Josiah, it's actually really helpful advice from me, because like it's like I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and I want everyone to like me, and I want like and if they don't, like, what did I do to hurt them? Is my first like thought, is like, what did I do to hurt them? How did I? But really, as you said, you cannot be compatible with everyone. That would be a nightmare. Let's be honest. There needs to be diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like, I cannot get that through my brain, even though I know that has to be true. I can't get it through.
And you'll see like different players will have different mindsets when it comes to that as well. And when you've been GM for a while and you've played with a few different groups, you'll really see that. You will get some players that, regardless of the game, regardless of the GM, regardless of the setting, they will always enjoy it. They will always find a way to enjoy it. And then you get some players that only really enjoy certain things. And if that need is not being catered to because either as a GM that's not your style, or because the game itself doesn't lend itself to that, then they're not going to have a good time. And that is not a criticism on anyone or anything. It's just that some people really do just have specific things that they like, and that's not always going to be an option.
Yeah, and that's definitely finding tables that you're compatible with, the people that you're compatible with, and that does take time to find that.
The great thing with Wayfarers is that there's always stuff going on, and there's always new tables that you can join. So
yeah, because a lot of the stuff that we are running are one shots, and so you can come in and play a one shot, and actually that's kind of in a way RPG speed dating. Like you're playing with a lot of different people every single time, and you can find the people that you want to play with, and then you can start building an actual party with those.
Can't think of a better analogy for it than that. That's amazing.
The other thing about the one shots that just came to mind is that, like, because we run so many and all of our GMs run them, if you're looking for a GM that you like, play play a one shot that is run by a different GM every time. And then when that GM announces a campaign, you're going to be like, oh, that's the person that I want to play. You already know. So you're not like committing to a whole, like, sometimes couple years worth of playing like one game. Let's be honest. We know this game, it can last for a very long time. You're not committing to that. You're not putting yourself in that position.
Yeah.
And then, so yeah, when you're joining a new group like Wayfarers, play as many one shots as you can, get involved with learning who the GMs are, and then, you know, inevitably they will announce a campaign and you want to be the first on the list for your favorite, and that's absolutely cool too.
Almost every GM wants to be doing campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll do a bunch of one shots, particularly with the Wayfarer GMs. We'll do a bunch of one shots because, one, it's a good way to get a load of people involved in many games. Two, because everyone's really, really busy and one shots are a lot less work to prepare for than a full campaign. But also for the exact same thing, because if you find a GM that you really like and you really gel with and you keep playing in their one shots, when they have a campaign, if you sign up for their campaign as well, the GM also knows that they can work with you as a player. It goes both ways.
It's true.
So I've been surprised at how unable I am to predict what a person's GMing style is based on who they are as a player. So like Sarah, for example, I played as a player with her for like a year, and then I actually had her as a GM, and it was completely different than what I would have predicted, right? Like Sarah is a GM and Sarah is a player is like a completely different experience.
What did I run for you?
So definitely. Oh man, I can't remember either. But
But it's fair. It's fair. As a player, I'm pretty chaotic and I just want to do everything and just gather as many things as I can.
Yeah, but yeah, definitely I encourage people to try out lots of different GMs because everyone's going to have their own style. It's going to be very different. And
I think like the first time I ever played with you, Josiah, I was GMing a game of Fate Core, and it was a system I had never played before, never run before. I'd literally read the book in like the 2 weeks running up to the game, and then we played that game. And I was just like flying by the seat of my pants that whole time. It was quite a chaotic experience for me. And then I've started playing loads of games with you since then, as both of us being players and you running games and all sorts of stuff since then.
Well, like as a GM, like I have so many things to keep track of that I'm improving everything. And so like someone will be like, you know, who's your big bad? And I'll kind of look at the big bad and I'm like, that seems like a 7 dice sort of a bad guy. So I'm going to shake these dice at you. And he's doing like 36 dice of damage or something like that, or 36 points of damage. That seems about right, right? And then as a player, I'm like, I made more spreadsheets. Check out my flowcharts. Like
I think I'm the exact opposite.
Everything.
I am the spreadsheet GM and the flying by the seat of my pants. I want the shiny things player.
I don't think I've ever seen you GM actually, Sarah, but as a person who's played with you on many games, I would say I agree with that.
Oh, Sarah's my first GM. Will always be my favorite.
The funny thing is, like, I definitely have a style as a GM, but I don't know what it is because every game I run is completely different. There's pretty much no similarity to them whatsoever. I have a game
it's
that
enthusiasm.
Maybe it's the enthusiasm. I do get quite enthusiastic when I GM, unless I'm tired, in which case I'm very lethargic as a GM. Yeah, and I always think, like, I ran Shadowrun for a while, which is an incredibly mechanics-heavy game, and that was like, okay, this is just like full-on mechanics-driven running of a game. And then I was doing a campaign in 5e, which I've been doing for over a year. That is, I have a set story in my head, and I'm not railroading, but at least guiding people to where I want them to go and what I want them to do. And then I've got Tyranny of Dragons, which is a pre-written campaign, which I've never done before, anything pre-written of that kind of extent, and doing that in a completely different way. And then I have the Villains game, where I am literally planning nothing and just reacting to what you guys do. And it's led to some of the greatest chaotic moments in my GMing life.
It's so good. I feel like I should type up all the scenarios.
Yeah, it's so good.
I've been typing them up because the Villains campaign is the only campaign, funnily enough, that I actually take notes on as a GM. I do not take notes as a GM because I have a weird thing in my brain, and it happened all the time during school and that. I would never take notes, but just retain stuff because my brain works in a really weird way like that. I can learn very well from visual and audible, but I can't write stuff. If I start writing stuff down, I just forget it and I miss it. But with the Villains, I've had to take notes because I can't keep track of what's happening from session to session because it's so chaotic.
Yeah, but if we didn't know that you were improvising everything and making it up by the seat of your pants, we would think you organized everything.
Yeah,
exactly that way. Except for when you had to like pause because we acquired an army. You were not expecting that.
Is it quite an army? Oh, you're going after the first big bad already? Oh, I wasn't planning this for maybe another 2 or 3 levels. Okay, we just quickly put together a battle map.
Okay, so I actually have a question for Fillets, unless we have questions from chat or something that we need to address. Okay, so my question actually has to do with the Villains campaign, because I'm not in the Villains campaign.
Okay.
But I'm just going to be honest. I was expecting the Villains game to go up in a massive, smelly inferno of failure because it has been the generally accepted wisdom acquired through many years, decades really, of suffering, that you can't run evil campaigns. In fact, if you look online, there's a whole body of knowledge as to why this will fail horribly. And this seems very relevant to table etiquette because it has a lot to do with table etiquette. And it's basically because the definition of evil has to do with a self-destructive impulse. So basically, how is your campaign like logically coherent? How is it not self-destructive? How is it not eating itself?
So I think a lot of this does go to the fact that the group that I have for the Villains campaign is a very good group that all pretty much know each other for the most part, other than a couple of people that I've pulled in from different places that might not know everyone ahead of time.
Is there a bigger bad?
There's a lot of big bads. So this is the thing. The one thing I did, because there's a couple of people that are kind of very new to the group, and then everyone else kind of knows each other for the most part. The first thing I did when I was kind of talking with these guys in the session 0 and putting it all forward was, you guys have to work together to survive in this world.
Ah, okay.
They are a group of villains that are living in a city that is ruled by evil people. And like straight up just kind of told these guys, there is a crime lord in this city who is level 40. There is a wizard in a forest just outside of the city that is level 50. If you start pissing off the wrong people, you are going to have to deal with that, and you guys are going to be really low level. So there was definitely that kind of air of just like, these guys don't want to pick fights with just random people because they don't know what level that person is going to be. There's also just the fact that this is a group that does actually work very well together and is very coherent. And I already said there is already internal conflict within the party, but the fun thing is that the conflict is between our Erinese Devil character, played by another one of our GMs here, Fergus, and our human monk character, played by our friend Chris, who both of them are lawful evil, and their conflicts have come from a place of opposed lawful ideals. And so the conflict never breaks out into full-on PvP. It's kind of gone into a lot of subterfuge, and these guys know that there's a very good chance that these guys might end up in the 9 hells very soon, having to plead in a court trial because of things that have happened between those 2 characters. So the only kind of internal destruction that's happened has been very structured and lawful, which has been quite funny.
I think what's also what I mean, that's a lot of the outer. I think as players with that game, we've also built our own internal structure. So like my character has loyalties legally with the Aranese because we have a contract to help each other. So that's 1 year where we have to be friends. And the monk character, we kind of have history as like childhood growing up near each other. There's a bit of loose loyalty to help each other, which is very interesting for my character because that's where the conflict is happening.
Between those two players.
Yeah. But then on the other side, we have these other players who are siblings. And so there's these structures that have been built for mutual loyalty across the board. It's kind of a situation where we are stronger together than apart. And so there are things that we all have our own goals that we initially want to meet, and we'll probably say, screw the rest of you, I want this thing for me eventually. But because we're lower leveled and we want to amass power individually in some different cases, we can achieve those goals together much easier than apart.
Yeah, and the character I brought in halfway through is a minion character.
Yeah.
So like basically loyalty to the not highest bidder, but like the one that's going to protect them the most kind of thing. Just groveling and very yes, master, I'll do what you want kind of thing with their own like little flaws and things. But I would say as far as evil, not sure that my character is officially evil.
My character is definitely evil.
Yes.
Your character is psychotic evil.
But I think the question though, because Josiah, you asked, is like, how is it not imploding? It's like a lot of those specific things. And I think all the players are also experienced players. Am I right in that? Some of the people I have
pretty much. Yeah, I think everyone is quite an experienced player at this point.
Yeah, and so it's going. I think it's going into an evil game, going in knowing evil does not mean dick. Evil means you're self-serving, but that self-serving could involve using other people for your own ends, and so working with other people. Just because you're evil doesn't mean you can't work with others.
And that's just it. And we also kind of were saying, like, you are evil, but you are, and even though they are evil characters in an evil city that is ruled by evil people, this is still a lawful place. There are laws and there are structures. And if you go against those things, there are consequences for those actions. And these people, whilst maybe evil and self-serving, are not idiots. They're not going to go out and start causing chaos, and some of them are, but they're not all going to and start causing this chaos, because that's just gonna put an end to everything. And even in characters, so there's actually kind of
it's really the chaotic evil side of things. That's the. But
we have chaotic evil. We have chaotic evil characters in the Sarah plays chaotic evil. I think that it kind of also comes in two waves. So the characters don't necessarily want to cause too much trouble because of their survival instincts, but at the same time, I don't think the players want to be stirring up all this trouble either, because everyone's just having a great time watching all of the stuff that ends up happening. Like, and our friend Emma, who's played with for years, she's in the game, and 2 sessions in, they got into a fight with a were-rat and she contracted lycanthropy, and it hasn't caught up to them yet. They haven't realized that
Tabaxi, who's a were-rat. How great is that?
A Tabaxi pugilist who's a were-rat now, and
nobody knows.
And so I think everyone's just quite excited to see what's going to happen. So no one wants to put an end to this by doing something completely out of left wing and trying to be destructive, because it's fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that the players value the stories of the other characters, and so they're not sort of taking the excuse of it's what my character would do and using that excuse to just toss a grenade into the room and just end other storylines.
Yeah, no one wants to sabotage each other's stories. Like, I like everyone's characters. They're great.
It's such a mad thing as well, because when I was like, I'm going to do a villains game, I'm also going to open it up so that people can just play actual monsters as character races. So we've got Sarah's playing a night hag. Sam is playing a beholder. It's so we've got a satyr in the group. We've got an Aranese devil.
Wait, Sarah's playing a beholder?
No, I am playing a night hag.
Sarah's playing
Sam is playing a beholder.
yeah.
Oh.
Sam Carey is playing a beholder wizard, who
You seem
is
disappointed.
hilarious.
I mean, if you could play a beholder, why are you not playing a beholder?
Because I can play a night hag, Josiah. This is my dream.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
That was the thing as well. Like everyone came up with such different character ideas, and out of the whole party, I think, because we got a group of 7, and 4 of them are playing actual character races. We've got Katie's Kobold, we've got Emma's Tabaxi, we've got Chris's human, is like literally the only human in the group, and then Mike's Satyr. And then outside that we have a Night Hag, a Beholder, and an Erinese Devil.
Katie is playing a kobold?
Yes.
Katie is playing a kobold.
He's very, very, very stupid.
Oh, he's
Yeah.
so great.
Oh,
It was so
I
funny. Such a
I
great
hope you're at
character.
least weighed down in magical items.
No, at the moment, my character is currently wearing an oversized shirt, has a dagger and a pouch with some coins in it, and that is all.
No.
Yep.
Yeah.
No.
It was so funny because Chris's monk gave Katie's character a set of throwing knives. She tried it once, missed, and just went, I don't know how to use these, and threw them away. It's just great character stuff in that game.
Okay, so the GM advice here, right, is that no one's fun is invalid as long as everyone's having fun. Even if it sounds
100%,
like
yeah.
a really bad idea, if everyone's having fun, then it's totally valid,
That
right?
comes
And
down
that's
to
true.
the
I
rule
would-
of cool, right?
It's definitely down to
The rule of cool. Okay, I actually have something to pitch in here. This was
Hold on,
something
just
I did.
hold on, hold on
for-
1 second, because I think Flays wanted
Okay.
to end.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
so I did want to just add to that is I will say, as the GM of this campaign, I do 100% not recommend running a villains campaign for a group that you don't know.
That I think would be asking for trouble.
That would be definitely asking for trouble, and particularly because, as you said before, people always use that excuse with villainous characters where they go, it's what my character would do, and
Yeah.
it's just like, is it? Or are you just being a bit of a dick?
You have to be very
Hmm.
careful with those kind of campaigns too, especially
Hmm.
I think with people's triggers and like different
Hmm.
topics. You have to
And
bring
we-
up. Like, we had an extensive session.
We had a very extensive session 0 on that subject because
Yeah.
that was a very
Yeah.
important thing.
And I did make
Yeah.
sure when my night hag was one of the players died, and we were talking about it afterwards, and she's making a soul bag, and I just made sure that everyone was okay. Like the player suggested it using his dead character, that she made a bag out of him.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we had a player death in like session 2.
Yeah. That's the thing. You got to make sure everyone's okay. So out of character is like,
Yeah.
is this okay with everyone? I want to make sure every
Yeah.
single person is okay with this before it
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead,
new
Chad. Go ahead.
GMs, there is a complete player consent form that you can print out online. For some games, this is probably a bit overkill, but if you're going to run an evil campaign, you want the whole sheet with,
Yeah.
the itemized list of like, are you okay with incineration? What are you okay and not okay with happening to animals in this campaign?
Yeah, it's
Are there some childhood traumas that might be triggering, right? Like you need to know about these things.
Yeah, so very much so. You have to, in particular, when you have a campaign like that, you have to be super careful about that sort of stuff. And yeah, no, we established all of that really early on to just be certain that we weren't going to do anything that upset anyone.
So there's 2 ways. There's 2 different names for basically the same thing. A lot of card games have what they call the X card. In Exalted, it's called the Red Rule, which is basically that particularly when it comes to like seduction or anything sexually oriented, that if someone says, I don't want this isn't happening, I'm not okay with this, that the scene stops, we fade to black, it just doesn't happen. That needs to be like an absolute, we're not going there. And that's called the Red Rule. And that generally needs to be something that's agreed upon with the group, just because, gaming's supposed to be fun. It needs to be a safe space. And sometimes you won't know what those kind of sensitive spots are until you get to that. So as a GM, I would just recommend you say, we have this thing we call the red rule. And so if you say, I'm calling the red rule or something like that, you don't need to explain why. We'll just move on to the next scene, or it's just not happening, right? And so like in my example, maybe for petty reasons, when I was bored on the shipyard and they were describing in great detail the brothel scene, I could have called the red rule if I had thought of it. In my case, for petty reasons, but hey, we could have gotten on with the rest of the campaign.
Yeah. If you get people that you play with for a long time and you get comfortable with, more often than not, you'll be able to kind of sense what's okay and what's not. But it is always good to kind of check in on things if people are going to be comfortable with stuff or not in a particular group.
None of us are telepathic.
None of us are telepathic. One thing I kind of regret from our games, so from the Shattered Relay game, was when I took the first initiative in starting the Jadra Zayn romance storyline. And I kind of, the one thing I regret about that was not speaking to Sarah about it ahead of time, because even though Sarah and I have been playing for a while at that point, we were quite comfortable with each other. I was just like, this could go really horribly wrong, and I should have probably checked before that.
In retrospect, that's probably, good rule of thumb is that if you want to do a romance storyline with another player, make sure it's okay with them
Make
first.
sure it's okay with them first.
I am totally okay with this, but I mentioned it to somebody, and they're like, your husband was right there, because Ted's playing in the game.
Yeah, he's in the game as well.
And they're like, whoa, did that actually happen? But it is totally fine.
It was, and only because we'd been playing together for a while, I felt comfortable starting that storyline.
Yeah.
But I do feel like I should have said something ahead of time. But yeah, it's too late now. That was over a year ago. That started.
Blaze, it's okay if you want our characters to have a romance storyline. You have my permission now. No, actually, that has brought in some really cool moments. Not that
Really
anything has
has.
happened between our characters, because they're both
Really hasn't.
they're so dysfunctional.
Yeah. They've had one kiss, which was that first initial one, and then the rest of the time was just them either avoiding bringing up the subject or just things getting way too heated emotionally because of other things that had happened.
Yeah,
That
or
they just
both
have a
of
really
them,
lovely
like-
moment, and it's been nice.
When the Rona is all done with and we are back in person again, one thing that we did that I hadn't encountered until then, which was helpful, was we have a couple of players that really like to act out scenes in person. And it was helpful to have the person ask for permission before touching and or grabbing the person or grabbing another person or something like that, because it turns out some people are sensitive to just being touched, not like in weird places, just literally being touched on the shoulder or hand or something like that.
Yeah, even stuff like that. Like, if you are a person who likes to be really physical in the role play, do make sure that everyone else is cool with that ahead of time.
So that varies from culture to culture. Like the idea that some people are not okay with being touched would be like very shocking in some cultures, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so
No, I have asked when we were able to play in person. I have asked permission to be able to do because in the scene,
Sure.
I like with Fergus. My character is very upset with him, and I grabbed his collar and scolded him essentially. But before I'm like, are you okay? Are you okay? Okay. Did the scene. If there's any last minute, I think we're gonna wrap up. There's any final thoughts from anybody?
This was a pretty good covering of the table etiquette topic.
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
But for those who are watching, also make sure to tune in tomorrow, as we have our second episode of our Homebrew Lab series, where Sarah, myself, and I believe Fergus, but I will confirm with him before I 100% put him down on the roster for that, will be creating a brand new magic item for 5th edition.
Yep.
From random prompts that we pull out of a hat. So check in with that. Last one we did was creating a monster, and that was really great and turned out really, really well, and we all had a great time with that. So that series is really good fun, and everyone should watch it.
I'm crossing my fingers for a sentient weapon. Yeah, so boiling down, broad topic, communication's important. Being clear about what you're okay with and finding a group that gels nicely and being aware, self-aware. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and we will be back tomorrow, like Delay said, and 2 weeks from now, we will also have a new GM chat, and it's hoping that you can join us then.
Wayfarersleague.com to check out all the events. Make sure to join the Discord if you are not already, because that's where pretty much all of the social interactions and discussions go on.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Josiah, for joining us tonight. Katie, naturally, and Blaze. And thanks, guys, for joining in as well. Have a good night and happy Christmas.
Merry Christmas.